Welcome in Rose City to Soccer Made in Portland. Ryan Clark here with Chris Reifer for what is the final time, at least for now. This will be the swan song for Soccer Made in Portland, unless something wild happens later in this Timbers or Thorns season, in which case you might see our little heads pop back up here on YouTube if you're on there, or our voices pop up if you are not on YouTube. It is obviously very bittersweet for me to have to say goodbye on this podcast, only because, you know, covering these two teams and being on that beat for 2 years is something that is still hard for me to sort of get past and get over and move on from, because it was so meaningful to me personally. And hosting this podcast was always the highlight of the week, just to be able to unload everything that's happening, whether it was off field or not. Yeah, and shoot the shoot, off field, on field, everything that went down over these last couple of years with the Timbers and Thorns. It was a remarkable 2 years for sure. And you know, I'm obviously extremely excited about what this fall is going to bring with the Ducks, and covering that team over these last few weeks and not having a lot of time to do this podcast. I've really engrossed myself in that, and look forward to telling some really, you know, compelling stories there. But you know, just looking back and reflecting before we get into the nitty gritty, Chris, you know, what stands out, I guess, to you about the last couple of years and just, you know, the pod.
Look, the first thing that I'm going to say is just the hard truth about Soccer Made in Portland, that I think everybody who's been following this podcast for a while knows well, and that this is not goodbye for Soccer Made in Portland. It's smell you later. This thing has fallen and risen from the ashes so many times over the course of the years that I have full confidence that will happen again. I can't guarantee who's going to be in these like little windows on YouTube or whatever like the platform is. Maybe it'll just be like AI generated. Who's to say? But Soccer Made in Portland, I'm confident, will be back. And so yeah, you know, in the vein of Nelson from The Simpsons, it's not goodbye, it's smell you later. It has been a tremendous amount of fun every week to talk about this stuff with you. I actually think, you know, I think a podcast is a uniquely well suited format for a sport like soccer, right? There I think podcasts are good for lots of things. But I think in particular the game, because the game is up to so much interpretation, can be viewed so many different ways, that it really suits itself well to being the kind of thing that people discuss in a more off the cuff and less sort of clippy kind of way. And I've just loved doing that with you. It's been so much fun, and I will definitely miss it for however long we're not doing it. But yeah, I think you're right that we'll probably go rogue at some point if something really significant happens and sit down on a Friday morning at 7:00 like this and record a show. In which case you might just see it pop up on your Twitter feed or wherever else you find us on the World Wide Web.
Yeah, the studio's not going anywhere, so we can always log back
We're not
in.
burning the place down because this is my dining room table.
Yeah, and I'm not going to burn my place down. There's roofers that are going to be working today. Don't want to risk anything.
You're making investments, man.
Yeah, well, the HOA is making investments. So
that's nice.
I guess I have been making investments,
but long-term investments.
Rather, my fiance has been the one making most of those investments.
Thanks, Emma.
But shout out to Emma. You know, the person who truly supports this podcast in more ways than one. So jumping into the topics at hand here. You know, obviously the biggest headline of the last couple of months, since we haven't
debatable
talked about it. Oh, really? Okay. Well,
I mean, there are some pretty big headlines over the course of even just the last few weeks in the WOSO world.
Certainly. But I think that the U.S. women's national team winning gold trumps a lot of that stuff, only because, well, you know, we can, this is what the podcast is for, right? It's for us to heckling you, but for us to argue. It was obviously a significant moment for Sophia Smith, for Sam Coffey, you know, two Thorns who have led the way for that club for the last couple of years, and had their biggest international moment in their careers so far. It was big for Emma Hayes to come in and sort of right the ship after a disappointing World Cup. They were deadly. They were back to the U.S. women's national team that we've been familiar with. They were relevant and competitive on a national stage that is more relevant and competitive overall than the ones that maybe 10 years ago you saw the U.S. facing. And so this may have been the hardest gold medal that this U.S. women's team has won in its history because of the compression of the schedule and because of the quality of opponents.
It was. Yeah. I mean, look, these tournaments aren't the tournaments that we saw 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where, you could sort of just expect the U.S. and a small handful of others to kind of skate through to the semifinal. And that's when the competition began. That's just not the case anymore. There are many, many more good teams, which is good. I don't say that by any means by way of doom. That is a very good thing. That is an outstanding development. The number of teams that you have that have depth, the number of teams with tactical sophistication. I mean, it's exploded over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. That's one of the most exciting developments sort of in the women's soccer world across the globe. And so this was a tough tournament for a lot of reasons, but the quality of the competition was phenomenal. You didn't have, 2 group stage games that you would win 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-0. That's just not happening anymore. And that's a very good thing. This was a competitive tournament throughout. It was also a tournament in which, frankly, I thought the U.S. women's national team was phenomenal. And I think it got hard for them as the tournament dragged on. And I think they'll probably look back and they'll ask some questions about how they did some squad rotation and things like that in a tournament like this that is so physically demanding because of a schedule that is kind of by necessity just because of the Olympic format really compressed. And roster rules completely not by necessity, but by stupidity, that are extremely limited. And I think they're probably going to look back and ask themselves whether they could have put themselves in a little bit better position to be stronger in the stretch run. But overall, this was a very impressive tournament from the women's national team. Given that it started off in Emma Hayes' 5th game at the helm, after a several year stretch in which the national team really appeared kind of stuck in the mud, and then to be able to go from stuck in the mud to very genuinely and very fairly the deserved gold medal winners. They were the best team in that tournament, and like period, full stop. They were the best team in that tournament, and that is in a very good tournament. I think the way that they're getting the front 3 put together is something that should cause shivers down the spine of much of the rest of the world.
Triple espresso.
Let's keep working on that. I don't know. I'm not totally sold. It was really funny though when they said it on Good Morning America, because it was like they were really excited about it, and then so I'll confess, I don't know who the people on Good Morning America are.
You're thinking of Hoda and Jenna. Yes. Hoda Kotb and Jenna Bush-Hager. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Great. President Bush. Yeah. Okay. Now it's all coming together for me. This is how like the morning news circuit, not my circuit. But it was kind of funny watching it because they were like so excited to say it, and then I think it was Hoda. They were like, "All right, let's give this a go, like triple espresso," and they're like, we'll see. And I was like, yeah, that was kind of like, we'll see. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying full steam ahead. But whatever you want to call that front 3, it was lethal. And it's just the kind of setup that is so hard to defend, right? Because any one of those players can crush you. Like any one of those players can end the game.
Yeah, it was great to see Swanson come back and be the type of lethal force that we know she can be, because we've seen it, of course, from Soph and from Trinity Rodman over the last year or so. But since the injury, Swanson, this was her tournament. I mean, she scored the winning goal. It was this huge moment for her, and to be part of the trio up top that they have. I mean, that is going to be lethal for the next decade.
And the thing that's challenging is that they're all also fairly interchangeable, or at least have a high degree of flexibility within that front three, right? Like Swanson can drop into the middle and almost play like a 10 a little bit. You can either park Sophia Smith between the center backs, where she's an absolute terror, especially in transition, or you can put her out wide where she can stretch you. Trinity Rodman can either play up really high where she's going to stretch the back line, or she can come from a little bit deeper position in wide areas and really sort of be an outlet in transition. And so just the way that the options that those three give the women's national team, it puts opponents in an impossible position, right? they have to make some choices that are going to carry very significant, potentially fatal risks. And I mean, that's what we saw. I mean, even as things got hard for the US over the course of the tournament, that was still the thing that won them the games, because eventually the risks that their opponent were taking were in fact fatal. But then I also thought, and I think there's more work to do, especially in the midfield. I think that is where the women's national team showed the greatest degree of work in progress in terms of how they're going to put together sort of that central three. But Naomi Girma, I think, might be the best player in the world. And even though the U.S. had to sort of had some injuries and things like that in the back line, as they rotated through, they were still defensively very, very, very good over the course of the tournament. And I think if you look at that sort of midfield and backline collective and say they've got a lot of pieces, but it's kind of a work in progress, that's pretty scary. That's because
it's a pretty good work in progress.
Because if you got that front three, and then you've got this unit that collectively I think still has some additional upside, which is totally to be expected, by the way. Like, this is totally to be expected, that this would not be a finished product, especially in that phase of the game at this point of Emma Hayes' tenure. Oh man, they might be really good, really, really good over the course of the next several years if Hayes can keep them on this trajectory. The trajectory that has been a very, very steep upward trajectory just in her first few months in command. So I mean, the tournament couldn't have gone better from sort of all of the vibes perspectives. And I think we back. So hope you all had fun.
You know who else is back is the Portland Thorns.
They're back.
They welcome back Sam and Soph soon to wave their gold medals around and maybe toss them into the crowd. And no, they wouldn't do that. They would probably lose them and somebody would run away with them. But knowing Thorns fans,
don't throw your gold medals into the crowd. Like, keep a good eye on those.
Keep them to yourself. But knowing Thorns fans, they'd probably toss them back. So that celebration obviously is coming up for the Thorns, but they have another game before that. A couple of games on the schedule coming up. The big storyline, of course, lately, beyond the Summer Cup, which was more of a tune-up for players that were kind of left over from the Olympics than anything.
That was the right way for NWSL to handle the Olympics window.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that is the formula going forward. But keep your regular season competition for when you're going to have your best players, because that's what people want to see, and that's what makes the best outcome in the best, most competitive, reasoned outcome over the course of a full season. So that's all I really have to say about the Summer Cup.
Yeah, there isn't much else.
It served its purpose.
Yeah,
but that is the way.
Yeah, it definitely is, and keep the team fresh, the ones that aren't destroying themselves with 5 games in 2 weeks like the Olympians were. But that the big storylines, of course, the last couple of weeks has been the moves that the Thorns have made. Trading Janine Becky to Rossing Louisville for Raylan Turner, a rookie out of UCLA, a forward, somebody who could be a really dynamic pairing with Sophia Smith up top and is on sort of her type of age timeline. If you think about keeping Soph here long term, keeping her here long term, someone that's versatile, can play up top, can play in more of a wing type role. Who knows how they're going to use the two of them together, but I think that it's something that the Thorns had the flexibility to do because, as we talked about a little bit off air, Janine Becky had flashes of real quality and was a major locker room presence for this team.
Major locker room presence. And that's the biggest thing that I think is lost here. She was a very, very good leader for this Thorns team over the course of the last, 2+ years.
Yeah, she was. She was beloved by like everybody around this team. She was always, and her comeback from injury was remarkable as well. She was a constant voice in that group. So they're obviously going to miss that, but in terms of fitting her into these different lineups and combinations, especially when they had somebody like Morgan Weaver healthy, it was hard for them to really find a spot that best suited her talents. So I think she'll have success in Louisville as they try to sort of go win now mode. The Thorns are looking to win now, but also to build for the future with this move. I think it's a major win for them as far as the trade goes, and both teams got what they needed, basically. The other deal, of course, being, the Alex Sponstra, a friend of Sophia Smith's and somebody that hadn't really gotten much of a fair shake in Kansas City, gets traded for some cash, basically, to Portland. So only one player going out, 2 new coming in for the Thorns. Two players that may have varying levels of impact on the team in the immediate, but the type of retool that could be just what this team needs to sort of make a run and build on what they did in the first half.
I still think, and I still very much remain of the perspective that the midfield is going to determine how the Thorns do over the course of the rest of the season. And that's true to some extent from the back line, but I actually think that the most important issues are just sort of the structural health issues that they've had with the engine room. And having Sam Coffey as your anchor is good, to be sure. But honestly, if I were to select one person, one player who I think is going to sort of determine what the Thorns' fate is over the course of the second half, really like last third of the season, it's Jessie Fleming. I think if Jessie Fleming sort of comes into being the player that the Thorns brought her in to be, this could be a very, very dangerous Thorns team. I think if she does not, it's going to be a lot of what we've seen over the course of the first 2/3 of the season, and so that for me is really the question. That said, I think these moves in the attack make sense. Sponstra, I think, is a nice depth piece to bring in. You need those, so excellent. Let's see sort of whether this change in environment and a little bit more opportunity to break through really stacked Kansas City attack to try to break through, which I think is why the move makes sense. The move for cash essentially makes sense for her, especially to get to a place where she has a little bit more opportunity to get some minutes. But the move for Turner and in trading Becky is, I think, one that makes sense from the Thorns perspective. Honestly, I'm scratching my head a little bit from the Louisville perspective. I don't get it. You're on 16 points through 16 games. This is, I think, as you put it, for them, a win now move. And what are you winning now? Really?
Yeah, you worry about the desperation that comes with that. And this is, of course, theorizing, but, people have talked about like they really, really want to make the playoffs so they can have that extra game from a revenue perspective is sort of what the rumblings are. That's a little scary if you're talking about like, not only maintaining relevance in a league, but
if that's why you're trading away one of your good young players, you've already lost.
Yeah, that sucks. like they drafted her with the intent of her being a star eventually, right? I mean, that's the hope.
Or at least a major contributor. And frankly, she's had a solid rookie season. Everything seemed on course from that perspective. I mean, I don't get it from the Louisville perspective. I like it a lot from the Thorns perspective. And look, I mean, the reason why I think the Becky trade makes sense is I really don't feel like, and part of this is certainly injuries, and part of this has just been kind of the nature of the Thorns roster, but Becky just hasn't been utilized to the fullest of her capabilities in Portland. I mean, you'd sort of see it when she'd be here in Portland, and she's kind of a contributor off the bench, coming in, will give you a good shift here and there, but isn't sort of a mainstay in the team. Then you see her go out and play for a good Canadian national team, and she is one of their leading attacking players. So there was sort of always that disconnect between her utilization in Portland and her utilization in Canada. And I think that is exactly the kind of player that, for the player's sake, but also just for the club's sake, you should be looking to move. And I think this became especially sensible for the Thorns with the emergence of Peyton Linehan over the course of the second half of the season. I think if you're looking at Linehan as somebody who can be kind of that first winger off the bench, who is the player who you're going to bring in to stretch the field, give some spot starts to here and there, and to kind of provide that attacking punch in wide areas off the bench, this is very much a move that you can make. To move Becky for a high upside player in a position where the Thorns really did not have much in terms of depth behind Sophia Smith, sort of in the number 9, usually more central, but can play wide forward, that I think Turner slots in well for. So I think this is a move that makes a lot of sense. Is it a game-changing move? Probably not. Is it a move that sort of changes the Thorns trajectory over the course of 2024? I mean, I don't think you can say that. But it's the kind of move that if it's available, yeah, you should make that.
Yeah, and Turner too is somebody that's like a vertical threat. We've seen it with Louisville, and that honestly, you think about what the Thorns have done and where they've succeeded. That is one area in their attack, and there are a few areas where you can be critical of how they've attacked in the last few years. Most prolific goal scoring team in the league. That's one area where you think about all those corners that they get. They are so often lacking that vertical threat. The most success they've had is when the ball falls to the feet of somebody like Christine Sinclair, and she just is clinical and she puts it home. And Soph is obviously not the tallest player in the world, so she's not going up for headers very often. So Turner can provide that. The depth that she and potential that she possesses obviously is undeniable. So that's something that I'm sure that they saw in her, and I think that the versatility of Smith is something that we saw on display at the World Cup. Now, obviously, with the Thorns, I'm sure her preference is to remain that out and out number 9 and that player that they put the ball at her feet in the middle of the field and just let her just tear it up as she has all season. But that versatility, if you need to start Turner, if you need to bring Turner in, Soph's ability to get out wide and use her speed and bring the ball central in the ways that she was successful in doing in the Olympics. She can bring that out when they need it in the right moment. And there's going to be tough games in the postseason. There's going to be competitive games. It's going to be a much harder road to a championship than what the Thorns had in 2022 if they're going to make that run. And so these are the little tweaks that they're hoping can make the difference, but it's still very much is an uphill battle.
They're still manifestly the underdogs here. I mean,
yeah, they are. There's 4 teams above them.
Yeah, and that they are at least a significant chunk below the top 2. And if they want to get to that point where they're competing, I'll betray a little bit of skepticism that they're going to get back to that point this year. But if they're going to, they're going to need to find all of those sort of clubs that they can pull out of the bag. So we'll see how it goes. But they are, it's sort of now or never in terms of finding those gears that they need to see if they can get up to the level of the Orlandos and the Caseys.
And the other major storyline in women's soccer to
this
wrap,
is the biggest one.
Yeah, this is definitely, I think, reflecting on what I said earlier, this is the biggest one.
Gold medal, schmold medal. Throw it into the crowd. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly. This is a labor agreement. This is major.
This is an enormous story.
Yeah, this is a big story, I think, not just for soccer and for women's soccer specifically, but for sports in the United States, as we talked a little bit about off air. The new collective bargaining agreement for the NWSL set through the 2030 season. The major highlights, of course, being the elimination of the NWSL draft, which is a first for major professional sports in the United States, and the agreements in place in various other labor circles for players, including the freedom of movement and free agency that is true free agency, and the ability to have a say in whether or not they are traded. Which, you think about sports culture in the United States and this sort of view that even a lot of fans have accepted, that, oh, well, it's a business. That's just how it goes. And even players have this refrain, right?
That's a cruddy part of an otherwise really awesome job.
Yeah, being an athlete is great, and you make a ton of money in a lot of cases compared to, depending on what type of athlete you are and what league you play in, compared to the average person. And you get to play a game for a living. That's all great, but player treatment and equity and compassion and kindness, these sort of values that NWSL players have continually advocated for individually, they have woven into this CBA in ways that I think can have a major impact on sports generally, and could really set the stage for other leagues to follow.
So I'm measuring my words because I don't want to overstate this. Women's soccer players have proven over the course of the last decade to be the most effective and powerful force for driving change in all of sport, period. And it's not even clocking close. Like, it is not even close. Between what the U.S. women's national team did in terms of shifting the Overton window for the way national teams support a women's team vis-a-vis their men's team, that was, until it happened, basically everybody said that was impossible. And they did it. This CBA, in many ways, including some of the ways that you just expressed, getting rid of the college draft, requiring player consent for trades, that is Overton window shifting, not just in terms of how women's soccer players are treated in NWSL. Obviously, it's a major change there too. But that is Overton window shifting in terms of just how sports work. And you bet your bottom dollar that when that deal came out, the Major League Baseball Players Association was saying, oh. The MLS Players Association was saying, ooh. The NBA Players Association was saying, oh. The NFL Players Association was saying, interesting. This is, we're not feeling it now. This isn't on ESPN First Take or whatever the show is now. Is that another morning show that I don't know anything about?
Yeah, First Take is
one. Really not strong in the morning shows.
Stephen A. Smith, man.
Stephen A. is not talking about this. Stephen A. is not talking about this. Stephen A. is going to be talking about this in 2 or 3 years. Well, like, I guarantee you that. And I don't know if he's going to be talking about it sort of in the framing of the NWSL Players Association negotiations. I don't know if he's going to be talking about it in that, but he's going to be talking about it in terms of these other players associations who are going to look at this and say, oh, this is a new ballgame now. This is a new ballgame. We've seen what owners can do for athletes. We've seen what leagues can do for athletes. And we want some of that too. And that's how these things work. That you see this kind of sort of cross-pollination between sports and players associations all the time. And this is, now we got a new leader. The standard now for collective bargaining agreements in sports leagues is the NWSL Players Association CBA.
Yeah, and the stuff that we highlighted wasn't the only aspects of this. This is, of course, a wide-ranging agreement.
There are a number of things. I mean, this is
salary cap is a big one. That being higher, and then of course the minimum salaries being
charter
higher.
Flights. Like, I mean, it's all the things.
Child care, parental leave, stuff that all of these players had likely to fight tooth and nail for behind the scenes. Look, the NWSL is an infinitely more progressive league when it comes to those things than other sports leagues are, but it's still a business. It's still a sports league with its own interests, and they, I'm sure, had to do a significant amount of negotiation, they being the players behind the scenes, to get stuff like this across the line. And it is remarkable.
And NWSL owners want to make money just like MLB owners do, right? I mean, like let's be realistic about that.
Yeah,
they're not in this to lose money. This isn't a charity case.
Yeah, that's not a charity case. It's not a pat on the back, good job thing. These are like multiple hundreds of millions of dollars that are being paid for these franchises now.
And guess what? They're going to make money. That's the other thing. They're going to make money. And that's going to be the other point that all of these other players associations are going to make, right? They're going to say, look at NWSL. These NWSL owners have been seeing increases in value just hand over fist, to use a slightly regrettable phrase from Portland soccer history, and are just printing money, or printing value at least. And they still did this stuff. You can provide these benefits to players and still derive value out of your league and still derive value out of your team. And that's going to, Stephen A is not talking about it now. He's going to be talking about it in a few years. But I mean, look, I am so impressed, like beyond impressed, by the way women's soccer players have been able to organize and to advocate and negotiate to I mean, just manifestly change the world of women's soccer. I think it's also only fair to give credit to the owners here. This doesn't happen unless you also have owners that are forward-looking and ambitious and are willing to sort of take some risks to prove that this kind of model can work, right? And so credit to them as well for being at the table and being willing to entertain and agree to these ideas. We see owners in sports in many ways as sort of conservative, conservative forces that are trying to hold back change. We've seen it really, really, really strongly in MLS, where over the course of the last couple CBAs, when everybody around the league has been saying, man, this really makes sense as a time to like be a bit more aggressive in how you're investing in the league, to partner with the players on some of these initiatives. MLS owners have fought against many of those things, sometimes to their own detriment, where they later regret it.
Yeah, and the primary motivator, it seems, of the last decade of MLS, which has undeniably seen a ton of growth, both in popularity and in shareholder value. The primary motivator in that case has been, let's be honest, shareholder value. It's been making these franchises in single entity leagues more valuable for the mostly white guys,
while keeping the balance sheets
on
clean.
This team, and they're extremely wealthy people that are getting wealthier as a result of it. It keeps the balance sheet clean. There's there is this veneer of, we want to grow the game, we want to increase its popularity, but also to give back to the game domestically. And there's obviously credit to be given to MLS for doing that in some cases, but it seems that when push comes to shove, the player rights in MLS and the bargaining that they've been able to do, and the ability of players to make enough money to have the benefits that they deserve, to have the freedom of movement, and for teams to have the financial flexibility in order for that to be a possibility, is extremely limited. And so for MLS in particular, I think that that's probably the league most likely to benefit in the near term for that. As you hear Porter make an appearance on the podcast, the roofers have arrived here at the Clark Knight residence.
Yeah, that'll happen. Well, that was Porter. Smell you later. But yeah, I mean, look, I think it's very much felt in the MLS experience at times, like the owners will have to be dragged kicking and screaming into the future. What I think the NWSL owners have shown here in partnering with the NWSL players is that they are partners in moving into the future. And it is, I mean, it's going to make NWSL, it's going to keep NWSL the best league in the world. I think it is right now. I think that take was very well supported and very well borne out by the most recent Olympics. And it's going to keep, I mean, and this is going to make NWSL just enormously attractive for players around the world. And I think it's going to make it so that these owners can continue just printing this value that they've been over the course of the last few years by investing in this league. I think you've got an ambitiously minded group of owners who understand right now that aggressive investment in this space is the best financial course. Not only it's the best course for the sport, but it's also the best course for them.
Yeah, and it is definitely has the potential to be foundation setting for other sports. So,
but I just want to circle back on the first point that I made.
Yeah,
which is that the people who have been leading these organization movements within women's soccer over the course of the last decade plus, have done something that I definitely didn't think was possible. And they've done multiple things that I think I and many folks did not think were possible. It's absolutely incredible. And these folks should be insanely proud of what they've accomplished. And they should be sort of coming in for further flowers, so to speak. Because it's been, I mean, it has been perspective changing in terms of not only what is possible in women's sport, but I think it's going to end up being perspective changing in terms of what is possible just in sport generally.
Speaking to our pals in MLS, who we just discussed briefly, Leagues Cup, yeah, there we go. Leagues Cup wrapped up for the Timbers a bit earlier, I think, than folks expected, given their performance in the group stage. But
it's not a competitive tournament, so whatever.
I mean, they would have liked it. It would have been something that they potentially.
But it's not a competitive tournament.
For. Yeah,
if it was a competitive tournament, they wouldn't have been going on the road for the first knockout game. I mean, it's just the kind of thing that as soon as you saw that come out, and I know it's sort of like baked into the format. But like as soon as you saw that come out, where you're like, oh, you have a group leader going on the group winner, not leader, winner, going on the road for the first knockout game, you're like, all right, I see what's up here. This is
that's the unseriousness. This
tournament.
About,
this tournament is for an audience of one. That audience is Tim Cook, and I just like you all clearly don't care about the competitive integrity of this tournament, so therefore. I probably also should not care about the competitive integrity or just generally about this tournament.
Yeah,
I mean, if you want to be taken seriously, be serious. But this isn't a serious tournament, so I'm not going to take it seriously.
As you shouldn't. It's unfortunate that the Timbers got put in that position because I think that, regardless of how the game turned out, I think that the tournament showcased some real strength on the part of Phil Neville's team and some ability to potentially put some stuff together down the stretch in this season. A team that's hovering in the middle, of course, of the Western Conference standings has been up and down. We've talked all about the ups and the downs this year. Started really down, came back up, kind of moved back towards the middle. Looking at those Leagues Cup performances, what stood out to you in those, and then what needs to happen, I guess, down the stretch of the season for the Timbers to sort of get into that upper tier?
I think the combination of the Leagues Cup performances, but also the last few games in MLS, leading into the friendlies tournament, has kind of highlighted that the Timbers are sort of at a crossroads, at a little bit of a precipice in their season. And what I mean by that is you look at the home performances, the win over Leon, the 4-0 over Colorado, and it is really easy to be really impressed because they're really impressive performances. They've looked great, especially in the attack, absolutely lethal, like unhandleable at times.
Yeah, and right now Evander is on track to have the best statistical season individually in Timbers history.
Although he's a major doubt for this weekend.
Yes, he is. And
as a podcast, we should note these facts.
Yeah, that's another thing too we can talk about is him being healthy. So
yeah, but there's a big but, and that is that in their last 3 road games, the Timbers have conceded 3 goals in each of them, and they've lost each of them. And so, frankly, as I look at this Timbers team, I can't really tell right now whether they're poised to sort of make a run into the top 4, which is where on talent I think this team belongs. I don't think you see as many performances of attacking excellence as you have from a team that belongs anywhere other than the top 4. Because if you're outside the top 4, like you're kind of mediocre at best, right? I mean, outside the top 4, like you're okay. There's nothing about this group's attacking prowess that is just okay. It is, at times, downright elite.
Yeah, and you can make an argument for it being the best in MLS.
It
period.
is. I mean, the only reason I think that's a little bit of a hard argument is because this year more than any has had a couple teams that are truly sort of like spectacular in that phase of the game. You've sort of got, when full strength Miami, when everybody's healthy, is up there. LA Galaxy have been just absolutely on fire. On fire all year. And LAFC when they're firing on all cylinders. I mean, you have a few teams, Cincinnati certainly up there in terms of their ability to fill it up. So you have a few teams that are like this, but I think the Thorns, I think the Timbers, when you are in when they are clicking in the attack, are in that group. Not like making a claim to be in that group. They are in that group in terms of attacking ability. And as I look at the rest of the roster, it's not like it's bad. I mean, it's not like it's unplayable. And so if you have this exemplary attacking team that is in the league elite, a league elite that is better this year than at any time in the history of the league, and you have like a rest of a roster that is playable, at least, you should be in the top 4. You shouldn't be an okay team. And so in terms of where I think the Timbers should go, in terms of what they have on the roster and the tools available to them, I think it should be a run into a home playoff game and being a team that frankly should be, one of the squads that folks are pointing to as a real competitor in the playoffs and a tough out for anybody. But I'm very much not sure that they're going to be. Because as I look at the road performances in particular, as I look at the structural and defensive frailties that they've shown on the road, the inability to sort of control a game against a St. Louis team, especially, that folks have kind of figured out how to control St. Louis. Last year it was a little bit harder. Folks didn't really figure it out. Folks have figured that out. And then go and concede 3 times against a St. Louis team that's been really struggling. I think it kind of gives me some of the feelings that I had back sort of in the beginning of their dark period at the beginning of the year, in which the attack looked really good, but they still weren't winning games because they were just conceding goals ad nauseum. And if that's going to be the case, and because remember, there were sort of 2 phases of that downturn. One was when the Timbers were still scoring a lot of goals, but they were conceding a lot of goals, and they sort of had that incredible streak of games in which they'd scored multiple goals but hadn't won a single one of them. And then the attacking output dropped a little bit and the bottom fell out. And that's when it got really dark. And I think there are ways that you can look at these road performances in particular and say, well, are the Timbers actually gearing up for another stretch kind of like that, where they're not maximizing points in games in which they're nonetheless filling up the nets? And then if they hit a little bit of a rough patch in the attack, which just happens all the time, get an injury, you get a guy who, goes on, maybe Evander has a stretch of a few tough games. I mean, those things just happen all the time. And they happen multiple times over the course of a season, where your attacking output goes from like 2+ per game to, like 1 or 1.3 per game.
Or 1.1.
Or 1.1 per game. But, I mean, if their favorite number, if that happens, then you could very well see this Timbers team going on a stretch where they lose 4 of 5 or something like that. And if that happens, they cooked. They ain't going to do shoot.
No, and I think the biggest factor, obviously, is Evander's health in the coming weeks. It's unfortunate that he isn't likely to be ready for this weekend's game against St. Louis, because that'd be a nice, and they still by no means are out of that one. In fact, I think there's still a good chance that they win that game. Just given that it's at home, given the form that St. Louis is in, even though, of course, they lost 3-1 to St. Louis on the road. Then they play
friendly.
Yeah, in a basically friendly. Then August 31st, at the same time as the Oregon Ducks will be facing Idaho, the Timbers will be playing Seattle. and that one's also at home, so that's going to be a lot of fun over at Providence Park. And then a couple of games to start September on the road at
September gets
Colorado.
nuts.
Yeah,
September's tough.
September is tougher, undeniably, because you've got 3 of the next 4 on the road. First Colorado, then back home to face the Galaxy, who are the top team in the West. Then you go on the road to Salt Lake, on the road to Vancouver to wrap up September. That is some serious make or break territory for this team, because as you talked about, they're sort of sitting on this knife's edge where, like, you know, the things fall their way and the performances are strong. Then you're talking about a team that absolutely has the ability to rise into the top 4 in the West, because right now they're 8th, 36 points, 5 points out from that 4 line, which is Colorado. And you know, you play Colorado in that stretch, you play Seattle, you play Vancouver, you know, you play Salt Lake, who's up there just above Colorado. You give yourself the opportunity to make up that ground with those games. And so the results, and Phil Neville would be the first one to say this, the results have to show. They have to come through for this team in order to get them in the position they want to be in. Could they make a run of upsets in the postseason? Maybe, but we've seen the difference between this team on the road and at home this season, and really over the last several seasons. But just looking at this team, this group, the difference is stark. And so you want a top 4 seed. You want to host that first round playoff game, get some momentum, and move on from there in the more expanded sort of MLS playoff format. You want to be playing in the winter. You want to give yourself a chance to trek down to Miami, or have Miami trek up to you, and and get yourself in a final.
That's not going to happen. But
it'd be sick. Hey,
honestly, even if the Timbers somehow got ahead of those folks in the standings, if there was a Timbers Miami final, is there any universe in which MLS wouldn't put the final in Miami? Like, the Timbers could be 10 points ahead in the table. They'd be like, "Wow, we're going back neutral site. Just happens to be Miami."
Yeah, neutral site, and it's Hard Rock Stadium.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, who saw that coming?
Yeah.
But look, I mean, you make the point that they're 5 points out of 4th, which is factually correct and also vibesily correct. You know where they're also 5 points out of 10th. And that is both factually correct, and I think also should be vibesily correct too. Which, you know, I think is the story of this team over the course of the last 8 or 9 games that they've got in this season. They are on the knife's edge. They've showed, I think, signs of real promise and real peril over the course of the last few weeks. And the question is going to be sort of what wins out. But, you know, currently sitting in 8th, that's not impressive. That's not where this team should be still. And it worries me that the game model seems to be sort of this energy drink soccer all the time, no matter where they are. That, you know, the openness of the game in LA, like, LA is a really good attacking team. They want to open up games. The willingness with which the Timbers allowed that game to be open was a real problem. That's not how you play against LA Galaxy on the road. And it's that kind of stuff, even if they're able to get into the playoffs sort of on the strength of their attacking unit, if they don't fix that kind of stuff, they're not going anywhere in the playoffs, because there will be teams that don't let the Timbers open up the game on their terms, right? The games get really game statey as you get into the latter part of the regular season, and then especially in the playoffs. And if you're not good at handling games in multiple game states, as the Timbers are not right now, you're not going to win. Somebody's going to knock you off, and it's inevitable. And so that's what they've got to figure out. Their game model has to get a little bit more mature and flexible, so that they can respond to what opponents are dictating and what game states are dictating. And they're not there right now. I think they've showed some worrying signs in that respect over the course of the last few weeks, and that's going to be the big question now over the course of the next several weeks.
For sure. You know, zooming a little further in away from the big picture and their ability to, you know, contend and get into the top 4 and try and make a run toward MLS Cup. I think this season has had several really compelling and interesting storylines. Obviously, the top of that line being Evander becoming the type of player that they paid for, and becoming this elite playmaker. Santiago Moreno is the second one for me. He's had really a breakthrough season and has shown the type of flashes and ability necessary for them down the road, to sell him for a pretty significant profit.
Got to be talking about a sale of Evander too.
Yeah, and Evander is absolutely part of that conversation in terms of selling potentially to Europe, given what has transpired for him. And then the third one that I think is absolutely relevant over these last few months has been the reemergence of Zach McGraw. We've talked about their defensive challenges and issues, and those, in terms of their structure and their team defense, are still very much present on occasion, as we've seen, especially in those road games. But Zach has worked his way back into a regular opportunity. Now, part of that is by attrition and Kamal Miller being gone for a good portion of that, Miguel Araujo being gone for a portion of that. But when he stepped in, he earned his keep, and he's back in that mix again. He obviously had the two-headed goals in one game, which was awesome. And Zach's a good guy, so I'm very happy for him to continue to grind and continue to find his way in there. But those top two lines for me, those two attacking players in Evander and Santiago Moreno, building up absolutely their value on the transfer market, but more importantly in the near term, really dynamic and important players for the Timbers.
I have a few thoughts about this. I think one of the big things that has been a challenge, and to some extent I get it, with a new coach, and they've also just had some injuries and some absences that they've had to manage, but they've really not had a lot of consistency either in the 6-8 spot or in especially central defense. That's got to change. When it comes down to selections, Phil Neville's got to make some choices and go with them now, because they need to be establishing the structural stability that you get from consistency in those spots. And so that's got to change, and Neville's got to make that choice. And I understand why he's gone back and forth a little bit, both in terms of form and in terms of availability. I agree that McGraw has sort of reinserted himself into that discussion at center back. I'm not sure he is necessarily the way I would go, but Neville has to decide which way he's going to go, because they need consistency in those spots down the stretch. I also think, in terms of talking about players who have produced for the Timbers this year, this is a less sexy pick, but Felipe Mora has been really, really good for them. Has been really good, and that wasn't a sure thing, right? I mean, he's had injury issues over the course of the last few years. He's starting to get up there in age, where you don't know, especially coming off of injury issues, how that's going to play out. And he's been fantastic for them. He's been one of their most consistent players. And when you talk about having the playmaking quality of guys like Evander and guys like Santi Moreno, a lot of that can kind of fall by the wayside if you don't have somebody who's going to be consistently finishing off those chances. And Pipe has. And so I think that's been a huge factor in sort of making those guys look good. But this leads me to 2 points. One, I think, should be viewed as exciting, and the other should be viewed as frustrating. The one that's exciting is, I think the Timbers are going to be getting good offers for guys like Evander and Santiago Moreno in this upcoming winter. I think they probably got some in the summer. I understand why they probably weren't super interested just yet, but they're going to be coming in the winter, and they should take them. The Timbers, over the course of their MLS history, still do not have a single profitable major move outward. Like, think about that. It's been a long time, and they don't have a big sale. They have passed up on offers that they didn't view as good enough. They have passed up on opportunities. They need to, if for no other reason than to demonstrate their willingness to do this, to move players on to moves that those players want to make, they need to make some of those deals, and they're gonna get good offers for these guys, and they need to make them. The second point, and this is, and I think that's exciting. That's a good thing, not just for getting some transfer revenue into the club, which is a good thing because that's reinvestable money, but it's just like you need to be able to do that. It's if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to get good signings. You're going to get that reputation, and it's going to kill you. And so I think it's an exciting thing that they're going to get good offers for these guys, and it should be an exciting thing when they take them. As much as I want to continue watching Evander, as much as I want to continue watching Moreno, it will be a good thing when they make those deals. The thing that's frustrating, and I'll emphasize frustrating, I get not wanting to make a premature deal, but I think the Timbers have a window this year. I think the attacking output in particular that they've showed has demonstrated that they've got a chance, if they can put a few things together, to be a real force down the stretch. And with apologies to Mason Toye, who I think is a solid depth move and I think is a solid player and has performed well in his first few games, they did bupkis in the summer transfer window. And when you talk about these windows not being open forever, because if they make some of those deals that they should be making, this window might close, and it might close kind of soon. Then I understand wanting to be patient and wanting to wait for the right move, but sometimes you need to capitalize on a window.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'd like to have Evander and Santi for another year in an ideal world, and also in an ideal world to sell them.
But you cannot be going into this winter with that being your mindset, because when you might not get the offers a year from now, you can't. This is what they've done over the course of their entire time in MLS, saying, "Oh, we're going to hold him for another year, and then we're going to move him because the offers are going to come good then." You can't always make that bet. Because a lot of times, as they found out the hard way, it doesn't. It doesn't work out that way. Guys get hurt. Maybe he has a down season. Maybe he's just getting a year older, and so the price goes down a little bit. And then you're kind of like, well, would I rather hold him or pay, or get this price that I'm not necessarily excited about? So I'm frustrated, frankly, that they didn't make the moves in the summer transfer window that showed the ambition to win now. I mean, it makes a lot more sense. I'm talking about Ross and Louisville. It makes more sense for the Timbers to make moves like that than Louisville on the NWSL side. If the Timbers this window had said, you know what, we're all in for this stretch run because we know that we're going to have these what should be seen as opportunities to play in the selling market this winter, and we have these opportunities to sort of establish ourselves in that space. But we want to win right now before we do that. I would have been all fully on board with what they've shown. But they didn't. And it risks being in a place where they're neither good enough as a collective to win now, but they have these pieces that are too good to not sell in the winter, which is how you sort of find yourself in a place of consistent blah.
Yeah, there's a potential for backslide just based on those subtractions alone, those potential
it can be the right move to move Evander and say, you know what, this is going to make the beginning of next year hard. Yeah. Because even if we make a corresponding move, there's going to be an acclimation period, there's going to be all of that, and it's going to make the beginning of next year hard. But we're still going to do it. That's the right thing to do if that offer for Evander comes around, and I would bet a good amount of money that it will.
Yeah. Yeah, how much money? We'll see. Maybe in the 15-20 range. Who knows? But
I think if you get an offer for $15 million for Evander, which seems very realistic to me, you've really got to think about it. That's a fair price.
Yeah, imagine how cool it would be. Like not even just from the money perspective. How cool would it be to see him in La Liga or something?
Yeah,
like make a big jump and go succeed elsewhere. Then you're like, oh, I remember that guy. He kicked butt for the Timbers and was like this transformative type of player. How great would it also be, and maybe they're hedging their bets on this, and maybe they think that the roster as currently constructed can make that run, and maybe it will. We're neither of us are writing that off completely, but no. It would have been more likely, of course, as you said, if they made more moves in the transfer window that was open. I almost said transfer portal. My brain is in a different place right now, as you can tell. Different kind of football. But how great would it be if Evander can help lead them to the promised land? They win their second MLS Cup this year, and then you make that necessary move, and that move that does right by him, and is obviously a major success and a coup for the club.
And is in the long-term interests of the club. I mean, that's what I want to emphasize, that making those moves is in the club's interest. They need to start making them. Every other MLS team now, all the big ones, are making these kinds of moves. Even Miami, who is very much trying to win now, is selling players on when they have the opportunity to do so. Healthy clubs do that. And the Timbers haven't. And it's like becoming a problem. It's becoming a thing, and it's going to become a thing that's going to hurt them in terms of bringing in the kinds of quality of players that they want. And so they need to make these moves. But that also means that you need to be able to strike when the iron's hot. And I'm afraid the iron's hot right now, and they did not strike in the summer transfer window.
We will see how this all plays out this remainder of the season for the Timbers, and of course remainder of the season for the Thorns. We will be keeping a close eye on it. Chris probably more so than me, because I am going to be buried in the excitement of this Ducks season. Of course, 4 games, and then the Ohio State game is going to be the biggest thing ever at Autzen Stadium. A lot.
I'm going to be going to that.
Oh, you are. You've got to. Wow. Yeah. Nice, dude. Must be nice to be able to afford that.
So, it would be. I got the connects.
Good. That's good.
My brother, but
good connections. Those are tough to come by. It's going to be a fun season for the Ducks. I'm really excited about it. Obviously, as I said at the top of the show, really going to miss doing this podcast on the regular. I will push very hard for it to come back should something supremely relevant come to light, be it even potentially the discussion about a new training facility for the Thorns, or
that's got to happen.
A Thorns championship run that could happen.
Less likely to happen.
Less likely. And then maybe lesser likely, just right now at least, but still very much the potential for it to happen, a Timbers run in MLS Cup playoffs. We will be keeping an eye on it. These two clubs hold a special place in my heart, and I have felt welcomed and really accepted by this soccer community in ways that were profoundly unexpected for me. I was a guy that came into this beat knowing very little in the way of the technical aspects of soccer, and frankly the depth of cultural strength that exists within this soccer community and within soccer communities across this country. I was moved by it, and I was genuinely very emotionally attached to that job. So it was hard for me to set this aside for something that any young kid coming out of journalism school, which was me only like 6 years ago, would be really freaking hyped to be following Dan Lanning and the Ducks around this season. But there was that duality for me, and so that would be my final sort of perspective on this is a feeling of gratitude and a feeling of continued admiration for and acceptance by the soccer community, which genuinely means a lot to me. And I'm still going to be showing up to games when I can. I'm still going to be watching them when there is no conflict with the Ducks. So this is something very special to me, and I
now
appreciate
with a beer in hand, I imagine.
Yes, now absolutely with a beer, or maybe one of the canned wines in hand, for sure.
Look, that gratitude for you, I think, should be very much a two-way street. I think you did a tremendous job of coming into fresh and without a ton of context, a beat that required some just hard-nosed, boots on the ground journalism. And having been around this club, the sport generally, but the club and the clubs now, for a long time, you came in a time in which the clubs needed, and the people around the club needed, some someone who's going to come in and uncover and tell some truths, even when they were really hard truths, because that's what is necessary to grow and to get better. And that's what is necessary in order to maintain and build the relationships, even if they around the club, even if at the time that those things are coming out, it strains them. And so I think there is and should be a lot of gratitude for you for coming in and being willing to uncover and to tell those stories, even when it was hard, even when there was significant risk for you. And I think we both know personally that there was at times significant risk for you. And that is the work of journalism. And journalism is important in every phase of our, public community, from the sports teams that we like to follow, to the governments that sort of guide our civil societies, to the business communities that kind of run the economy. That kind of journalism is absolutely critical, and it's not always folks who are doing it on the national scale and doing it at sort of the big high levels. A lot of times it's the folks who are doing it on the ground in their communities. And I think you did a tremendous job of doing that for this club. And I think both the club and the clubs and the community should very much reflect the gratitude that you feel for them, toward you, because you have done them, and you've also done your employer, the Oregonian, in OregonLive.com, a tremendous service in the way you went about it.
That means a lot, man. Yeah.
What I will say for the folks listening is, look, soccer journalism in the U.S. is a hard beat in which to make it, right? There are a lot of balance sheets that don't look great in that world, and it's just a challenging space in which to exist. And I don't say this with even an ounce of bitterness, because frankly, personally, I've never been in it to make a living. I am not in it to make a living now. I never have been, and I never will be, quite candidly. But we need people to be in it and able to make a living. And so when you see things, when you see people doing good work, click. When you see an interesting article, click and read it and share it. When you see an outlet who is making the investment to provide that kind of journalism and that kind of coverage, subscribe. And sometimes that means if you've got a few bucks to spare, throwing those few bucks into a subscription, because people need to be able to make a living, and it doesn't come free. It doesn't cost nothing to produce, and it is important. It is of value, and so I understand all of the economic choices that folks have to make, and those are all very understandable. And if somebody doesn't if that's not in the budget, that's perfectly okay. But if you got the room in the budget, it is worth supporting, in my view.
Yeah, at all levels. And I will obviously, continue to, within my own news organization and for other news organizations, continue to advocate for more robust staffing when it comes to coverage of soccer, particularly in this community, because I know how important it is. These are the challenges we obviously face in journalism, is the balancing of business interests and of the reality of an industry that is around the country shrinking at a very dangerous rate for the state of our democracy. You have to balance these things, and that was part of the challenge with changing how we covered these two teams. It was by no means, and this was something that was repeated to me during that process, it was by no means an abandonment of this forever, or an abandonment period. It was a sort of rejiggering of the puzzle pieces here in the near term to try and put ourselves in a better position in the long term. And in an ideal world, in the near future, we will have somebody on that beat full time, covering these two teams with the day-to-day coverage that we all know that they deserve. And I will obviously continue to advocate for that, even as I am trekking up and down to Eugene and making these long drives and telling the stories as they stand with the Ducks. There is absolute value in that journalism, and there's also value in the commentary and in the blogging and in the amateur journalism or even semi-professional journalism that exists out there within these soccer communities.
The enthusiasts have value too.
The enthusiasts matter. Darn it. And Chris Reifer is an enthusiast, as people on YouTube can see as his little headline below his name. And people like Chris and like others in that space in Portland, the people at Stumptown Footy, Rose City Review, and elsewhere, they are doing good and important work as well. And will continue to be that type of presence. But yes, absolutely, professional journalism needs a more robust presence, not only in Portland soccer, but in soccer generally, because this is a growing sport that deserves that coverage, and it's exciting, it's fun. I mean, geez, like I said at the start of this, I didn't really have that much interest in soccer. I knew the Timbers were good. I knew the Thorns were good, at least historically. And the Thorns had their championships, and the Timbers had their one. In my time during college is when they won that one, but I didn't realize how special it was until I was in it. And so understanding how special it is, you got to show that to people through your, as Chris said, through your investment, but also through your advocacy and through raising your voice, because that stuff matters. It's journalism is a balance of serving an audience and maintaining the ability financially to continue serving that audience. So
there are stories here to be told, and it's our responsibility as a community to do what we need to do to create the circumstances in which they can be.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks, buddy. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a really fun couple of years doing this. This, of course, does not have to be the absolute unquestioned final episode, but
smell you later.
We will smell you later, as Chris so eloquently said at the start of this and at the end of this show. So for Chris Reifer, for myself, for the Oregonian, we thank you all for continuing to listen to this podcast. And it's not goodbye, it's see you later.